Hi, I'm Mike. Welcome to the salon. This is Mental Floss Video, and did you know that a 1997 poll found that, on average, Americans believe that 20% of the federal budget goes to NASA? It generally has between 0.5 and 1% of the budget, and the highest it's ever been is 4.41%, which was in 1966. And that is the first of many facts about NASA that I'm going to share with you today. In 1958, President Dwight Eisenhower founded NASA. Yet another reason to like Ike. NASA stands for National Aeronautics and Space Administration. It's an acronym, by the way, not an initialism, because we pronounce it NASA and not NASA. Today, around 18,000 people work for the organization, with an additional 40,000 contractors and grantees. Peak employment was in the 60s, with around 411,000 people working there, either in-house or contracted, and that was in 1966. NASA sent 6 missions that made it to the moon, Apollos 11 through 17, though of course Apollo 13 didn't make it. So far, only 12 people have walked on the moon. They were all men and all part of Apollo missions. To be an astronaut with NASA, you have to have either 3 years of related experience or have logged at least 1,000 flying hours in the command of a jet aircraft. In general, space exploration was just a lot better funded during the arms race with the Soviet Union. Like, President Lyndon B. Johnson once defended spending money on NASA by saying, "Now would you rather have us be a second-rate nation, or should we spend a little money?" It's very hard to imagine any politician saying that now. In the 1960s, NASA and the US Atomic Energy Commission teamed up to make nuclear rockets. They were built, tested, and ready to go by 1968. There were even plans to send one to Mars, but the US space program lost enough of its funds by that time, and it became unfeasible. Vacation on Mars, as it turns out, very pricey. And NASA does more than just space stuff too. Like, their environmental research and sensor technology program developed a robot plane called the Altus II. It's used to fly over wildfires and send data about them through satellites. Neil Armstrong once said that he's way more proud of landing the lunar module than actually walking on the moon. In his words, pilots take no special joy in walking. Pilots like flying. Pilots generally take pride in a good landing, not in getting out of the vehicle. So I guess for Neil specifically, it really was one small step. Neil's buddy Buzz Aldrin held a religious ceremony on the moon. He actually brought a home communion kit on the Apollo 11 and took communion there after landing. Interestingly though, NASA asked that Aldrin not quote the Bible because the crew of the Apollo 8 made some space waves after reading the book of Genesis while orbiting the moon. Jack Garmin was a 24-year-old NASA employee while the Apollo 11 mission was happening, and part of his job was to write down every computer alarm code that could go wrong, along with the solutions to those problems. So lo and behold, there was a computer error during the Apollo 11's attempted landing. It was almost aborted, but Garmin saved the day by having the appropriate code and its solution memorized. You've probably heard of Astronaut Ice Cream, but as it turns out, it's not really a thing. It was only taken on one mission, it was crumbly, and the astronauts didn't like how it tasted. Plus, by 1972, NASA had figured out how to transport real ice cream to space. Now that is science. Another questionable NASA endeavor, the Learning Channel. That's right, NASA helped found TLC, known for shows like Sister Wives and The Long Island Medium. In 1972, it was developed to be an educational channel, and NASA helped to distribute it for free using their satellites. It was sold to Discovery in 1991. NASA has contributed to the inventions of some pretty cool stuff besides Astronaut Ice Cream and TLC. Stuff like baby formula. Researchers worked on an algae-based additive as a possible food supply to be brought into space, known as formulaid. Nowadays, it's something that's put in baby formula. Scientists at NASA also invented scratch-resistant lenses, like the ones in glasses. They developed them while trying to make plastic space helmets. And of course, they're also responsible for a record-breaking Speedo. In the early 2000s, Speedo International Limited approached NASA about a swimsuit that would drag less, and NASA invented just that, the LZR Racer wetsuit. It was too good, actually. After the 2008 Summer Olympics, it was banned from future Olympic competitions. And every single aircraft and air traffic tour in the US contains some technology that was developed by NASA. NASA also has a lot of random information about our habits, like our holiday lights, for instance. Thanks to satellite information, they know that light intensity in US cities is 20 to 50% higher during Christmas and New Year's. The fastest launch of anything ever recorded was the New Horizons launch. It blasted off at 36,000 miles per hour in 2006. That means that it passed the moon in just 9 hours, compared to 3 days for Apollo missions. A few months after the launch of New Horizons, astronomers voted to remove Pluto's planet status, but not everyone was on board with that decision. Chief Administrator of NASA, Charles Bolden, has said, "I call it a planet, but I'm not the rule maker." My question is, Charles, Chief Administrator of NASA, if you're not the rule maker, who is? By the way, you'll remember that in 2015 we got our first photos of Pluto from New Horizons. We actually could have gotten them in 1986, but funding was cut in 1971, making that impossible. You know, a pattern seems to be developing here. NASA recycles, by the way, like the Endeavour space shuttle, which was used from 1992 through 2011, was actually made up of some spare parts. Its construction only lasted for 5 years because they were able to reuse bits of the Discovery and Atlantis. And speaking of the Endeavour, it was named by children. There was a competition in which students got to write in their pick for the shuttle's name. Endeavour won in 1989. And speaking of which, a write-in campaign got a space shuttle to change names as well. The shuttle, which was originally constructed in the mid-70s, was originally going to be called the Constitution, but Star Trek fans wrote hundreds of thousands of letters to President Gerald Ford asking him to rename it Enterprise. It was made so. The crew of the Apollo 15 got into some trouble when they brought hundreds of stamp covers to the moon with them to be sold when they returned. According to David Scott, one of the astronauts who got caught, this was a witch hunt. And obviously, NASA knew what was going on because everything has to get approved before it gets taken to the moon. The crew was eventually banned from entering space ever again because of stamp covers. A thing that I don't even know what that is. Katherine Johnson was one of NASA's most well-known mathematicians. Between the 1950s and 1980s, she worked as a calculator, figuring out the trajectories of launches. Once they had switched over to computers, scientists would still consult her to fact-check the computers and make sure that the numbers were right. The oldest man ever in space was astronaut John Glenn. He went on the Discovery mission when he was 77 years old. He had previously been on the Project Mercury spacecraft in 1959, making him one of the first astronauts ever. A man named George Aldrich was the chief sniffer at NASA for 38 years. Basically, he had a really good sense of smell. He sniffed everything that went into space, including personal photos, Bibles, even the ink on checklists. This is to prevent a weird smell, any weird smell, making it up into space because it would make the astronauts miserable, because there is no way to get rid of a weird smell in space. In 2009, NASA officially, finally fessed up that the original recordings of the moon landing were, much like my 4th grade talent show recital, erased and taped over. Space vehicles get assembled in the Vehicle Assembly Building in Florida, which is the biggest one-story building in the world. It's actually so big that it gets its own weather. On humid days, rain clouds even emerge below the ceiling. The town of Esperance in Australia famously fined NASA in 1979. The space station Skylab had expelled some debris which landed in the town, so they asked for $400 for littering, which NASA never paid, maybe because of those budget cuts. Who knows? Similarly, NASA was sued in 1997 for, quote, trespassing on Mars. 3 men from Yemen claimed that they had inherited the planet from their ancestors, so NASA was, in their estimation, trespassing. Mars might seem close since, we saw Matt Damon there, we went, we got him, he came back, but the Mars rover is currently a whopping 141 million miles from us. The Curiosity rover is about as big as a Mini Cooper. Now, you may be wondering what NASA is working on now. Well, they're developing a new Mars rover, which is expected to launch in 2020. It costs an estimated $1.9 billion. One of its many experiments is a method of turning carbon dioxide to oxygen on Mars. They also want to lasso an asteroid in space. Basically, they're hoping to pull an asteroid that's passing by down into a stable lunar orbit, then astronauts can explore it. And I think that this is just about the coolest thing I've ever heard. I know there are lots of jokes and references about astronauts being like space cowboys, but this really takes the cake. Or I guess lasso's the asteroid. And finally, I return to the salon to tell you about the floating poop mystery. During day 6 of the Apollo 10 mission, Commander Thomas Stafford said those 12 words that you never want to hear. Give me a napkin, quick, there's a turd floating through the air. It's not surprising, considering that astronauts had to go to the bathroom in a plastic bag, which is not an easy feat. No one ever fessed up to being the responsible poop party either. Thanks for watching Mental Floss video, which is made with the help of all of these very nice people. Once again, my name is Mike Rignetta. If you like my face, you can see more of it on my YouTube show, Idea Channel, and if you like my voice, you can hear more of it on my podcast, Reasonably Sound. We'll put links to those things in the description. Leave your favorite planet in the comments. I'm gonna make an executive decision and say that Pluto is allowed. And hey, DFTBA.